Good evening, everyone. Three important articles, three quick summaries and insights on how you should be using this article for your mains. Mostly today's articles are for mains. Okay, so let's quickly begin. Maybe it wouldn't take a lot of time today. Let's begin. The first article. So this article is about the big tech's contempt for Indian public health. See, this topic is mainly concerning GS2 health, and you will also see this is directly linked to science and technology. Now, where is the area where you will see a convergence of GS2, GS3, health, science and tech to IR? It is through the so-called big companies, multinational companies, pharma industry as well as the multinational companies converging together. And this also has an element of globalization. That is why this topic is a very peculiar one, because it tries to sort of create a convergence of multiple disciplines. Okay, let me now explain the context of this article. Let's say you go to any platform on Google or YouTube or Instagram, anywhere, and just search any prohibited drug, or let's say any prohibited illegal stuff. You are still getting advertisements. So let's imagine the situation from Google's side. Do you really think Google intentionally wants to promote this? Not really. But why is it still happening? Because it would take an additional cost to Google. I mean, there would be some additional cost to Google where they create a team only to ensure compliance with the law. Let's say they automated ad creation and the entire ad campaign. What really is happening here? There is no manual intervention to see if that ad is legal or illegal. Everything is automated. So everything is tuned to the search volume and the ads are running freely. How should we stop this? Let's say, for example, during the time of COVID, we have seen this case before also, where some Ayurvedic practitioners said that they found a cure for COVID. Now, when that search volume is popping up and the sales are increasing, in this case, it might not be harmful. It at max can, just be ineffective. But there are some drugs which can be harmful also. And if it falls into the wrong hands, we don't know what kind of consequences can occur. So do you think there is any moral responsibility on a big company like Google? If yes, why aren't they acting? Simply put, because nobody is questioning them. And this issue of false advertising, please go sit there. This issue of false advertising is not new. It existed way back in the British era, in British India, because people always have this fascination for quick fixes. They want this magic drugs that will, enhance their productivity or, magically cure all their problems. People always have this tendency to believe quick fixes. That's why, as a regulatory authority or state, there is a need for the state to regulate this behavior and tap into the weaknesses of people. Do you think people should be well aware? Yes. But we can't control the minds of people. Rather, we have to stop it from the demand side. Okay? That's why we need a regulatory structure. There is a act which will prohibit this. And this first time it was seen way back in 1927 itself. Harun Jaffer. He was the one who first suggested to British Indian Council back then that we have to bring out a law which will regulate this kind of behavior. And in 1954 we had the DMRA, Drugs and Magic Remedies Objectionable Advertisements. Magic remedies, as the name itself says. This law prohibits any advertisements, list of 54 medical conditions. The list must have gotten bigger. We have to go back and see the appendix of that particular act right now. But let's say 54 medical conditions is what we have right now. Why is this a problem? It is 1, harmful on a scientific basis. 2, ethically also it is wrong because it is misleading. So how should we go about it? This is the question raised by the writer. This is not a standalone issue. On one hand, you should understand that when it comes to health, doctors are not, regulated under the Consumer Protection Act. What is Consumer Protection Act? What is the background? Let me explain. Imagine you go to a shop. A person A goes to a shop and they buy a commodity. That commodity claims to solve a problem. Let's say I am buying this digital pen, which is supposed to solve the problem of writing on a digital board. But what if it is not working? That is where consumer protection comes into the picture. As a consumer, I can approach the court of law and seek retribution or some sort of a solution for this problem. And once that problem is resolved, the case is closed. But this is not applied for doctors. Can you tell me why? Any logic? Then don't you think they're gambling with human life? There should be some sense of responsibility fixed. Okay. But they are the ones suggesting it. But isn't it ethically wrong? They can be, recently also there have been instances where many celebrities were held liable for promoting betting apps. Exactly. It is dependent on this diagnosis. This diagnosis has a certain logic. And sometimes there might be so many constraints. Let's say, for example, in India, if you want to suggest a medicine, ideally speaking, it should be done only after a diagnostic test which confirms it. But we go by probability. Imagine a situation where there is a condition which is not exactly captured. Something is deviant from this normalcy. And this drug reacted and the person is affected. So, should the doctor be, penalized for that diagnosis? If there is no diagnosis in a country like ours, most people will not get the even necessary, even for normal basic illnesses, they will not get the treatment. Healthcare is expensive. Either make healthcare accessible or believe in the system, existing system. If you do neither, the entire system will collapse under its own weight. And therefore, as a logical compromise, doctors were excluded from this consumer protection. Okay, there is some logic because we can't bear the financial cost. But why should we exempt the digital companies who are generating a lot of revenue from this? That is the logical question. Is it fair enough to let them go? Or should they be held liable for whatever is happening on their own platform? That's a moral question and a legal question also. If Google is allowing a digital ad which is harmful, should Google be penalized? Yes or no? If Google is penalized for everything, can you differentiate between an unintentional error versus an intentional mistake? How will the law differentiate it? So these are the kinds of checks and balances that we need to put in place. As of now, not just the regulator. Let's see here. There's one paragraph. Yeah. Read this once. It is perhaps time for India to take a page from the new American playbook to regulate TikTok and create new regulatory mechanisms. This is to ensure that the managerial personnel responsible for creating and enforcing content and advertising related policies in India are Indian citizens who are based in Indian territory and answerable to Indian courts. Anything short of threat of jail time for key managerial personnel will fail to ensure that big tech complies with Indian law. So in short, what is it that they're suggesting? You have, let's say, Google, and Google should have key stakeholders who are from India, who are Indian citizens subject to Indian laws. And they've mandated it, just like in US, how are they dealing with TikTok? Instead of completely banning it, they made it, compliant in this way. Why not follow the same regulatory structure for big tech in India? You can apply this logic not just for pharma, just about any misleading advertisement or any mishap that can get amplified on social media. This technique where the government will mandate managerial positions of this big companies, let's say Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple, whatever. They will be in India. The offices will be in India if they want to conduct a business. The personnel will be from India and they're subject to Indian laws and Indian courts. That will give the Indian officials some teeth in the issue. Of course, there should be checks and balances, clear-cut demarcations on how the law will operate and in what conditions it will operate. Otherwise, there is a danger of Indian officials harassing these companies as well. So there needs to be a fine, rule-driven, criteria-driven regulation rather than just wishful thinking. Okay, that's what this article is talking about. A start for North-South Carbon Market Cooperation. We have dealt with this topic multiple times. Carbon markets. What is carbon market? We already dealt with it in previous classes. Just a quick summary. What is carbon market? Let's say there are two companies which are producing carbon greenhouse gases. So one company is producing a lot of greenhouse gases and the other company has a technology which is actually absorbing them. So they will get an equivalent carbon credit which they can sell to this polluting company. Okay, this is the logic of a carbon market. Right now in EU, we have seen the other day about CBAM. What is the CBAM? Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. If any commodity, let's say for example steel, India exports a lot of steel to European Union. including UK, European Union basically. It's one of the largest market, and India is a very significant producer of steel. But the problem with the manufacturing process of steel in India is that it produces a lot of pollution, greenhouse gases, carbon emission. Now, let's say you are sending this steel to UK or EU. This is applicable. CBAM is applicable for EU. Let's focus on that. At the borders, when that steel is entering into EU, you will have to pay a penalty because this is polluting. The steel is polluting in nature. Essentially, we are trying to penalize polluting industries. We as in European Union. That's what the logic is all about. Now, India is also trying to come up with their carbon trading mechanism. So, let's say if there is a carbon trading between two Indian companies, and let's say for example, this steel company is already paying in Indian market. In CBAM, if there is a internal agreement between India and EU that okay, they are paying here, you don't impose tax again. If that agreement is arrived at, don't you think it will streamline the problem here? Not only are we trying to reduce pollution, but also we are moving towards decarbonization agenda. All of this is fine on paper, but the difference is, you know how it is easy in India to escape this carbon trading. We might buy fake certificates also. That is the danger. So, EU at one point of time can be unhappy about it and raise a flag. This is one problem. Second problem is, in the event, unlikely, but in the event of WTO coming back to life again, this can be a sort of a favoritism against the clause, most favored nation clause. Like say for example, going back to the concept, let's say you are trying to offer any advantage to one country, but if you are a part of WTO, that same advantage should be given to every other trading partner. So how will WTO react to this? Because if there is a bilateral agreement between EU and India, will it stand in WTO? That's a question. But that's a thing that we can worry about later, because WTO is almost defunct. The bigger question is, will this mechanism sustain? That's what we have to focus on. Only the days coming will tell us that. Okay, so you might get a larger question on climate finance and carbon markets, both at prelims and mains level. So how do we generate money to implement and also innovate technologies that will move us towards decarbonization? If this is a theme, any question, any initiative, or any technology that is discussed in newspapers or any magazines will become important for prelims. The money part as well as the technology part. How will you get money? Any mechanism related to that? Or how will you develop technology and how will you implement it? These two pillars will be the next important themes when it comes to environment in the next coming days. Okay? So, the historical evolution of these two concepts, climate finance as well as the climate technologies, climate adaptation and mitigation technologies, those two areas you will have to be thorough. You will get questions on both these themes. Okay? That's the central argument. There is no logical premise to say that CBAM is actually reducing emissions in the country. Like, if people are in this case India, if people are importer is actually paying the duty, logic of UK is that it will eventually disincentivize the importer, and they would rather move to a greener technology in the long run. That is their logic, but it is flawed. Yeah. The logic, the historical precedent that you are talking about, that they were unwilling to finance the projects, that stands true even now. But what changes now is the size of the Indian market. If you are trying to move away from Indian market, it is extremely difficult to scale up your sales. So it's a logical compromise. They wouldn't want to mess with India. No major power would want to mess with Indian markets because it's difficult to sustain and meet that numbers. Even a small fraction of Indian market and access to it can significantly ramp up revenues across many territories. So that's a trade-off. This is the, probably an off-the-record kind of a argument that you can make, but that's what it is. Logically, it doesn't make any sense because the article itself quotes that EU is imposing 60 euros per ton. India hardly imposes 1 to 3 euros in exchange. How is it going to make sense? It's not. But if it still makes sense, it's probably because of the market power of India. Anyway. The race for global leadership in science. I think we have discussed this many times. The competition for R&D activities in US, in China. It's a comparison. What is happening in the globe and how is it going to impact the geopolitics? This is the scope of the discussion. Why is R&D important? Let's go back to the basics. Why is R&D important? See, whenever you're trying to answer, be specific. Try to come up with exact keywords. It's vague. Give me an answer that will... Okay, I'll ask you a different question. What problem is R&D solving? Efficiency, exactly. R&D is making the existing processes efficient. And the second order function of R&D is creating something new, innovation. First problem is efficiency, then second problem is innovation. Okay? Whatever may be the capital we have, how do we make it even more efficient? How do we spend our money efficiently? This is the focus. Right? This is where R&D comes into the picture. But why is this a geopolitical issue now? Any link? Why is R&D a subject matter of international relations now? Look at history. I'll try to draw a parallel. Instead of sticking to this article and explaining stats, figures, etc., which I'm pretty sure you will forget after this class, let's understand the story behind this and focus on the insights that we can get. Okay, let's go back to history. I'm just trying to draw parallels. Okay, let's go back to history. And when I'm saying R&D, this is not just about science and technology. Rather, I would focus on partnerships. Why is it important to have partnerships, and how did partnerships actually change the trajectory of our world? This is the major focus. Again, this partnerships may be for R&D, maybe for trade, maybe for something else also, for strategic reasons also, but eventually they change the trajectory of the world, R&D being one of them, science being one of them, broadly speaking. Let's take a step back, go back to Portuguese time. I'll just give you a rough story, I will not go into the details. Portugal, way back in 1400s, 1500s, is not actually a very populous country. But mind you, the traders of that country were extremely adventurous, very ambitious. Just to put things into context, let's say a small area in Portugal they were just earning somewhere around 7 lakh units of whatever their currency at that point of time was. This is a small anecdotal story that I read, which while I am explaining this, it came back to my mind. I thought it would be nice to explain in this way. So at that point of time, Portugal was, in a small area of Portugal, they were having a revenue of 7 lakh. But some traders borrowed so much money and started investing that money on Spanish armadas, or the war fleets that were responsible behind fueling this colonial ideas. So they wanted to go and occupy new territories so that they can trade more. So this unusual partnership between mercantilism, or these merchant companies, as well as these local traders, finance versus transport, finance and transport, has culminated into a new idea of colonialism. The so-called East Indian Company, right from Portuguese till the latest French and other Dutch, all the other European powers, that was possible because of the partnership. And after that, partnership moved away from these merchant companies to another area where access to let's say resources was the major reason. Like, say for example, automobile, oil, then internet companies and hardware. Now we are in an era where there is a partnership between let's say the other day I was reading in news, you have a partnership between OpenAI, Nvidia, Oracle. Why is this combination strange? OpenAI is the LLM, that is the AI engine. Nvidia is the hardware provider. Oracle gives you entry into the corporate market. It is the corporate giant which all the existing ERPs, or the enterprise resource planning mechanisms, are there. What this essentially does is, it literally creates a monopoly on major segment of the market. How is this related to R&D? R&D essentially, I mean, for the sake of our exam, you should not stop at innovation and efficiency only, but also think in terms of process R&D. How do you do something in a new way that is again efficient and innovative? Even partnerships should come under this R&D. And it is this insight that makes science an IR component. Because essentially, international relations is about what? Creating partnerships. And science as a partnership creating agent is not something new. Global powers have collaborated for multiple reasons. The latest idea is science, R&D. Now, two nations, US and China, they want to establish some sort of a monopoly by occupying their place in different ecosystems across the globe. They want to enter Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, and create partnerships as quickly as possible so that they can cement their position. So this is how you are witnessing the growth of China. Previously, US was the monopoly when it comes to technology research. A close second was Japan. But now, the kind of growth that you are seeing in China, especially in this domain of AI, robotics, and hardware, thanks to their huge wealth of critical mineral resources, they can even, fuel the next leg of energy transition. So you are seeing a shift in weight from US to China. We are creating a bipolar scientific research driven world, which was predominantly unipolar. So who builds these partnerships the quickest? This is the race about. Looks like US is falling behind. Do we have any proof? Yes, we do. US is currently struggling with immigration. Is currently struggling with debt. It's struggling with keeping up with the domestic politics. There is internal fractions. It's getting polarized between Democrats and Republicans. And that's impacting the relations between many countries. Even the countries are polarized. Different countries want different parties in power in America. So that is going to impact the domestic politics. Vice versa. US politics is also going to impact the local politics. So it's becoming a highly complicated world, and technology companies are navigating the geopolitics. So, what is the conclusion here? US is reducing funding. China is increasing funding. So the insight that we have to gain from this, if it continues in the same way, within a couple of decades, China will be the leader. Even now, US is the leader when it comes to innovation. But if it continues in this way, it's just a matter of couple of decades that China virtually holds a monopoly on the next leg of so-called innovation, AI-driven innovation. And that is what US is concerned about. And that makes science an aspect of international relations. Across different papers and materials, you will hear terms like semiconductor diplomacy, semicon diplomacy. What is the underlying logic there? Your access to GPUs will determine how powerful you are as a technological nation. For example, there is this company called TSC, Taiwan Semiconductors and Chips. Taiwan's single strength is this semiconductor industry. A company and the nation which was unheard of in colloquial terms, unheard not in literal sense, but it's not a common name. Even Nvidia was not a common name until 2021. Only who are tech savvy would have understood what Nvidia was doing. Not a lot of people would know. But Nvidia was betting big, and it was doing this from a very long time. So was Taiwan Semiconductor Company. So Taiwan, a very small nation, became a hub of the most skilled engineers across the world. You are witnessing immigration into Taiwan from India, from US, because of the single reason. Science is driving policies, immigration policies. That is the, peculiar nature of international relations. So I want you to observe this trend. Partnerships. Don't look at international relations as just military, trade, and all this usual, lens, usual metrics. Look at it as negotiation for power. What defines power is different in different time periods. In today's world, what defines power? Partnerships. On this note, go back and see what is SDG goal number 17. Building partnerships. Okay? Understood? So, there is no need for me to explain what is there in that article. But this is how I would want you to approach that article conceptually. Okay, I think these are the 3 most important articles. That's it for the day from my end. Okay.